The coffee shop smelled like burned beans and old pastries when Daniel Carter walked through the door at 7 in the morning. He ordered his usual black coffee and sat by the window watching people rush past on the sidewalk outside. The barista called his name and he stood to collect his drink. That was when he saw her. She stood near the counter staring directly at him with eyes that seemed to shift colors in the fluorescent lighting. Her features were delicate and symmetrical in a way that made him uncomfortable, like looking at a painting that was almost but not quite right. She wore a simple blue dress that somehow looked both familiar and completely foreign. Daniel grabbed his coffee and turned to leave, but she moved quickly, blocking his path. Her hand touched his arm and the contact sent a strange tingling sensation up to his shoulder. He pulled back instinctively. She spoke with a voice that sounded like music, played through water, saying that she had been searching for him across 7 star systems. Daniel laughed nervously, assuming this was some kind of prank or that she had mistaken him for someone else. He tried to step around her, but she moved with him, maintaining eye contact. She said his full name, including his middle name that he never used, and told him they had been married for 3 cycles on her home world. The other customers in the coffee shop pretended not to notice the strange encounter. Daniel felt his heart racing as he backed toward the door. The woman, who called herself Lyra, followed him onto the sidewalk. She explained that their marriage had been arranged by the Council of Elders to create a bridge between their species. Daniel stopped walking and stared at her. He had never left his hometown of Portland, and had certainly never been to another planet. Lyra reached into a small bag at her side and pulled out what looked like a silver coin. She pressed it, and a holographic image appeared in the air between them. The image showed Daniel standing next to Lyra in front of a massive crystalline structure. He wore clothing he had never seen before and smiled in a way he had never smiled. The hologram Daniel leaned down and kissed. Hologram Lyra on the forehead. Real Daniel felt sick to his stomach, told Lyra she was insane and that he had never met her before in his life. Lyra's expression changed from hopeful to confused. She studied his face carefully and then touched the silver device again. The hologram shifted, showing multiple images of Daniel in various locations that he did not recognize. Each image looked exactly like him down to the small scar on his left eyebrow, from a childhood accident. Lyra spoke more urgently, now explaining that his memories must have been suppressed or altered. She said that he had volunteered for a diplomatic mission to her planet 5 years ago. Daniel shook his head and pulled out his phone to prove he had been working at the same accounting firm for the past 6 years. He showed her photos of himself at the office at his apartment with his cat Lyra, examined the phone with interest, touching the screen gently. She said the technology was primitive but functional. Then she looked up at him with those color-shifting eyes and asked why he would hide himself in such a limited existence. Daniel felt anger rising in his chest. His life was not limited and he was not hiding. He worked hard and paid his bills and had friends who cared about him. Lyra reached out again, and this time when she touched his hand, something happened. Images flooded into Daniel's mind like a dam breaking. He saw himself standing on the surface of a purple planet with 3 moons hanging in the sky. He felt the weight of diplomatic robes on his shoulders and heard voices, speaking in languages he somehow understood. He remembered Lyra's laugh and the way she explained the customs of her people with patience and grace. He remembered agreeing to the marriage to help establish peaceful relations between Earth and the Viridian Coalition. He remembered loving her. Daniel yanked his hand away and stumbled backward. The visions stopped, but the memory of them remained like an echo. Lyra watched him carefully and said that the neural block was breaking down. She explained that someone had wanted him to forget their time together and return to Earth without knowledge of what had occurred. Daniel sat down on a nearby bench. Feeling dizzy, Lyra sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. She told him that their marriage was not just ceremonial but legally binding under both Earth law and Viridian law. She said that when he disappeared without explanation, it created a diplomatic crisis. The Viridian Coalition believed that Earth had sent him as a spy to learn their secrets and then erased his memories to protect him. Earth's government denied any knowledge of the mission, claiming Daniel had never left the planet. Lyra had spent months tracking him down using fragments of data and following leads across multiple systems. She risked everything to come to Earth without authorization. because she believed he would want to know the truth. Daniel asked why she cared so much. Lyra turned to look at him, and for the first time he saw vulnerability in her expression. She said that their marriage might have begun as a political arrangement, but it had become real. She had fallen in love with the human who asked endless questions about her world, and tried to learn her language and made her laugh with his terrible attempts at Viridian cooking. When he vanished, she refused to believe he had betrayed her. Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotions he could not name. He wanted to believe her, but the rational part of his mind insisted this was impossible. People did not just forget entire years of their lives. They did not travel to alien planets and marry alien women. Lyra stood and extended her hand to him. She said she could prove everything if he would come with her. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct told him to walk away, to go back to his apartment and his cat and his normal life. But the visions he had seen felt more real than any memory he had. He took her hand and stood. Lyra led him through the streets of Portland to a location outside the city. They walked in silence, with Daniel's mind racing through possibilities. Were his memories false, or were his current memories false? How could both feel equally real? They reached an abandoned warehouse district, and Lyra pulled out the silver device again, pressed a sequence of buttons, and a section of the air in front of them began to shimmer. A doorway appeared where there had been nothing before. Lyra stepped through without hesitation. Daniel stared at the impossible doorway. He could see through it, to what looked like the interior of a spacecraft. The walls glowed with soft blue light, and symbols he almost recognized decorated every surface. He stepped through. The transition felt like walking through a waterfall. On the other side, the air tasted different, cleaner somehow. Lyra moved to a control panel and began activating systems. The ship hummed to life around them. Daniel explored the small space-touching surfaces that felt warm and alive under his fingers. He found a section of the ship that appeared to be living quarters on a shelf. He saw a photo of himself, and Lyra in the photo. He looked happy, truly happy in a way he had not felt in years. Lyra called to him from the control room. She had activated a medical scanner and wanted to examine his neural patterns. Daniel lay down on the examining platform, feeling vulnerable. The scanner passed over his head, creating a tingling sensation. Lyra studied the readout with growing concern. She explained that someone had installed a sophisticated memory suppression device in his brain. The device was designed to activate if he encountered anything related to his time on Viridian, or his relationship with Lyra. It was slowly degrading, which explained why he experienced the visions when she touched him. Daniel asked if it could be removed. Lyra said yes, but the procedure would be dangerous. Removing the device might restore his memories, or it might cause permanent damage. Daniel sat up and looked at her. He asked what she wanted him to do. Lyra's expression softened, and she said the choice was his. She could remove the device and possibly restore everything, or she could take him back to Portland and never contact him again. She said she would understand if he chose the life he knew over the life he could not remember. Daniel thought about his apartment and his job and his routine. He thought about the emptiness he sometimes felt on Sunday afternoons when he had nothing to do. He thought about the visions of a purple planet and 3 moons, and a woman who made him laugh. He told her to remove the device. Lyra prepared the medical equipment with careful precision. She explained each step of the process and warned him again of the risks. Daniel lay back down and tried to relax. The procedure began with a high-pitched sound that made his teeth ache. He felt pressure building behind his eyes. Colors exploded across his vision. Then memories came flooding back like a river breaking through ice. He remembered the recruitment process and the training and the fear he felt before his first journey through a wormhole. He remembered arriving on Viridian and being overwhelmed by the beauty of the planet. He remembered meeting Lyra at the welcome ceremony and thinking she was the most interesting person he had ever encountered. He remembered their conversations that lasted late into the Viridian night cycles. He remembered the wedding ceremony where they spoke vows in both languages. He remembered falling in love slowly and completely. He remembered the last day on Viridian when he was called to a meeting with Earth's diplomatic corps. He remembered drinking something they offered him and then waking up in his Portland apartment with no memory of the past 3 years. The memories came with Emotions attached joy and wonder and love and betrayal. When the procedure ended, Daniel opened his eyes and saw Lyra watching him anxious. Cautiously, he said her name the way he used to. Her eyes filled with tears and she smiled. Daniel sat up carefully and pulled her into his arms. She held him tightly and whispered something in Viridian that he now understood. She said she had missed him. Daniel kissed the top of her head and said he had missed her too, even when he did not know what he was missing. They sat together in silence for a long moment. Then Daniel pulled back and asked who had done this to him. Lyra's expression hardened. She said that someone within Earth's government wanted to end the diplomatic relationship with Viridian. They believed that humanity was not ready for contact with alien species, and that the alliance would lead to Earth becoming dependent on Viridian technology. Erasing Daniel's memories and making it appear that he had never left Earth, they hoped to create enough doubt and suspicion to collapse the diplomatic mission. Daniel felt anger burning in his chest. Someone had stolen years of his life to serve. A political agenda. Lyra said that now they had proof. The memory suppression device in his brain was evidence of the conspiracy. They could expose what had been done and potentially restart diplomatic relations. But Daniel would have to testify about his experiences. He would have to reveal that he had been living a false life for the past 2 years. His job and his apartment and his friends were all part of the constructed reality meant to keep him docile and unaware. Daniel stood and paced the small ship. He felt like 2 different people were fighting for control of his identity. Part of him was the accountant from Portland who liked routine and safety. Part of him was the diplomat who had fallen in love with an alien woman and dreamed of building bridges between worlds. Lyra watched him with understanding in her eyes. She said he did not have to decide immediately. They could stay hidden while he processed everything, but eventually they would need to make a choice. Daniel stopped pacing and looked at her. He asked what she wanted. Lyra smiled sadly and said she wanted him to be happy. If that meant returning to his Portland life, she would accept it. But she hoped he would consider coming back to Viridian with her. Daniel moved to the viewport and looked out at Earth. From this distance, the planet looked peaceful and beautiful. He thought about all the people down there living their lives, unaware of the wider universe. He thought about the version of himself who had been content with that ignorance. That version felt like a stranger now. He turned back to Lyra and said he wanted to expose the truth. He wanted to fight for the diplomatic mission and for the relationship between Earth and Viridian, and he wanted to go home to the purple planet with 3 moons. Lyra's face lit up with joy. She crossed the space between them and kissed him. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. They spent the next several hours planning their approach. Lyra contacted allies within the Viridian coalition who had continued to believe in the diplomatic mission. Daniel recorded a detailed testimony about his experiences, including the memory suppression and his time on Viridian. They gathered all the evidence they could find. 3 days later, they transmitted their findings to news organizations across Earth and to the Viridian Council. The response was immediate and chaotic. Earth's government scrambled to contain the story, claiming it was a hoax. But the medical evidence of the memory suppression device was undeniable. Scientists examined the data and confirmed that the technology used was beyond current Earth capabilities. Public opinion shifted rapidly. People demanded answers about why their government had sabotaged peaceful diplomatic relations. Protests erupted in major cities. Within a week, the officials responsible for the conspiracy were identified and arrested. Earth's president gave a public apology to the Viridian coalition and to Daniel personally. Diplomatic relations were restored, and a new mission was organized. Daniel was offered his old position back with honors. He accepted. Lyra stood beside him at the press conference where the announcement was made. Reporters shouted questions about their relationship and their marriage. Daniel took Lyra's hand and spoke clearly. He said that what had begun as a diplomatic arrangement had become the most important relationship of his life. He said that Lyra had risked everything to find him and restore his stolen memories. He said that he was proud to be her husband under both Earth law and Viridian law. The room erupted in camera flashes. That night, Daniel and Lyra returned to the ship. They prepared for departure back to Viridian. Daniel took one last look at the city lights of Portland below He felt no regret. He was leaving behind a false life to reclaim a true one. As the ship lifted off and accelerated toward the wormhole, he felt Lyra's hand in his. She smiled at him and asked if he was ready. Daniel smiled back and said he had been ready since the moment he saw her in the coffee shop. The ship entered the wormhole and everything outside the viewport became streaks of light and color. Daniel watched in wonder, remembering the first time he had made this journey back. Then he had been afraid of the unknown. Now he was excited to return to the world he had learned to love. When they emerged on the other side, 3 moons hung in a purple sky. Viridian stretched out below them, vast and beautiful. The capital city gleamed, with crystalline towers that caught the light of the system's twin suns. They landed at the diplomatic compound where crowds had gathered to welcome them. Daniel stepped off the ship and breathed in the sweet air of Viridian. People cheered and waved. Banner's Lyra took his arm and led him through the crowd. They were home. In the weeks that followed, Daniel resumed his work as Earth's ambassador to Viridian. He negotiated trade agreements and cultural exchanges. He worked to build the trust that had been damaged by the conspiracy, and every night he returned to the home he shared with Lyra. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. She taught him more of her language, and he taught her card games from Earth. They cooked meals together, combining ingredients from both worlds. They made plans for the future. One evening, as they sat on their balcony watching the 3 moons rise, Daniel asked Lyra what had made her so certain he would want his memories back. Lyra was quiet for a moment before answering. She said that she had seen the emptiness in his eyes when she first found him in Portland. She said that even without his memories, he had been searching for something. She believed that people could not truly forget love, even when their minds were altered. The heart remembered. Daniel pulled her close and said she had been right. Even in Portland, when he thought his life was normal, there had been a persistent feeling that something was missing. He had attributed it to general dissatisfaction or restlessness. Now he understood it had been the absence of everything he had found on Viridian, the absence of purpose and adventure and love. Lyra kissed him and said they would never be separated again. Daniel promised the same. They sat together, under the alien stars, and Daniel thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had been an ordinary person living an ordinary life. Then he had taken a chance on something extraordinary. He had been betrayed and had his identity stolen, but he had also been found by someone who refused to give up on him. Now he was exactly where he belonged. The diplomatic mission thrived under his leadership. Earth and Viridian signed historic agreements that opened up new possibilities for both civilizations. Other alien species took notice and began reaching out to establish their own relationships with humanity. Daniel became known across multiple star systems as the human who had bridged 2 worlds. But to Lyra, he was simply the man. She loved years past and their relationship deepened. They faced challenges and celebrated victories. They built a life that was richer and more meaningful than anything Daniel had imagined possible in his Portland apartment. Sometimes he thought about the person he had been before the memory suppression, that Daniel had been brave enough to volunteer for an impossible mission. He had been open enough to fall in love with someone completely different from himself. Then he thought about the person he had been in Portland, that Daniel had been going through the motions, surviving but not truly living. Now he was someone who had integrated both versions of himself. He was brave and open, and also practical and grounded. He was human, and he was Viridian in the ways that mattered. One day a young diplomat from Earth arrived on Viridian for training. The young man was nervous and overwhelmed by the alien environment. Daniel recognized the fear in his eyes. He took the young diplomat aside and told him his story. He explained how scary it had been at first, but how rewarding it became. He said that building bridges between worlds required courage, but it was the most important work anyone could do. The young diplomat asked if Daniel ever regretted his choice. Daniel looked across the compound to where Lyra was teaching a group of students about Earth history. She caught his eye and smiled. Daniel turned back to the young diplomat and said he had never been more certain of anything in his life. That night, Daniel and Lyra walked through the gardens near their home. The native plants glowed softly in the darkness, creating patterns of light. Lyra asked what he had told the young diplomat. Daniel explained the conversation. Lyra nodded thoughtfully and said she was proud of him. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. He said that none of it would have been possible without her. She had saved him from a half-life. She had given him back himself. Lyra touched his face gently and said he had saved himself by choosing to remember. She had only shown him the door. Daniel laughed and said that was a significant understatement. They continued walking hand in hand through the glowing gardens. Above them, the 3 moons of Viridian painted the sky in shades of silver and gold. Daniel looked up at them and thought about the impossibility of his life. A few years ago, he had been drinking burned coffee in Portland, and now he walked on an alien world with his alien wife planning their future together. It was absurd and wonderful, and completely real. Lyra squeezed his hand and asked what he was thinking. Daniel smiled and said he was thinking about coffee shops and memory suppression devices and purple planets. He said he was thinking about how one moment could change everything. He said he was grateful for the day a strange woman walked up to him and claimed to be his wife. Lyra laughed and said she had been terrified that day. She had crossed the galaxy to find him with no guarantee he would believe her or want to remember. But she had to try because some things were worth risking everything. For Daniel pulled her close and kissed her under the light of 3 moons. He whispered that he would choose her in every lifetime. Even if his memories were erased 1,000 times, he would always find his way back to her. Lyra held him tight and said the same. They stood together in the garden, surrounded by glowing plants and alien beauty. 2 people from different worlds who had built something extraordinary. The story of how they met would be told across the galaxy for generations. The human diplomat who forgot his alien wife and the alien woman who crossed the stars to bring him home. But to Daniel and Lyra, it was simply their story, the story of how love could survive memory suppression and conspiracy, and the vast distance between worlds. The story of how one person's refusal to give up could change everything. As they walked back to their home, Daniel felt complete in a way he never had before. He had found his purpose and his place and his person. The coffee shop encounter that had seemed so strange and impossible had been the beginning of his real life. Everything before had been preparation. Everything after would be adventure. He looked at Lyra and saw his future reflected in her color-shifting eyes. It was a future full of possibility and challenge and joy. It was a future worth fighting for, and he would face it with her beside him always.